The city breathes in gaslight and exhales fog. Cobblestones glisten with rain. Somewhere, in the twisting maze of Whitechapel's alleys, a footstep echoes, measured, patient, unhurried. A woman, cold, tired, desperate, leans against a brick wall. She doesn't notice the figure in the shadows. No one ever does, not until it's too late. Moments later, silence, then the whisper of movement and blood on stone. By dawn, the city will wake to horror. Again. The newspapers will scream of slaughter. Politicians will argue. Priests will pray. The police will fumble through the darkness, searching for a phantom. He has no face, no name, only a message, scrawled in red ink. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, the most infamous and mysterious serial killer in history. But this is not just the story of a killer. This is an anatomy of fear, of 5 women whose names became footnotes, and a city that tried to forget them. In the spring of 1888, as Queen Victoria's empire reached the apex of its global dominion, something malignant stirred in the shadows of East London. While the West End glowed with electric lamps and the clatter of cab wheels echoed along Piccadilly, the East End told a different story. One of smoke-choked streets, grinding poverty, and the desperate rhythms of survival. In Whitechapel, a densely populated quarter of immigrants, itinerants, and the working poor, many lived life one night at a time, scraping together just enough for a bed in a common lodging house. If they failed, they wandered the gaslit alleys instead. It was a world poorly understood by those outside it. Yet it became the focal point of national panic in 1888, when a series of horrific murders transformed a corner of the East End into a stage for one of the most infamous killing sprees in British history. The murders would eventually be attributed to an unknown figure who signed a taunting letter with the name Jack the Ripper, a moniker that ensured the case would become myth as much as mystery. But the tale did not begin with that letter. It began with a woman named Emma Smith. On the 3rd of April, 1888, Emma Smith was attacked in the early hours by what she claimed was a group of local men. She survived long enough to report her assault to the London hospital, where she later died of her injuries. Her name became the first to be entered into the Whitechapel murders file, a document that would eventually contain 11 names. Smith, almost certainly not a victim of Jack the Ripper, nonetheless marked the beginning of the terror. The next death came on August 7th. Martha Tabram, also known as Martha Turner, was found in George Yard, her body bearing 39 stab wounds. The frenzied nature of the attack suggested a personal rage, but her mutilations did not bear the hallmark surgical precision that would later characterize the canonical Ripper murders. Still, police at the time suspected a connection. Some even believed she was the Ripper's first victim. Then came the morning of August the 31st. At 3:45 a.m., the mutilated body of Mary Ann Nichols, known to friends as Polly, was discovered in Bucks Row. Her throat had been cut so deeply it nearly severed her head, and her abdomen was slashed open. Just hours before, She had been turned away from her lodging house for not having the fourpence needed for a night's bed. Polly was not a full-time prostitute, but she had likely resorted to soliciting that night to survive. A friend had seen her drunk on the street, boasting about her new bonnet, her prized bait, she said, to lure a client. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The savagery of her death shocked even the hardened officers at the Whitechapel workhouse mortuary, where the full extent of the mutilations was revealed. Her estranged husband came to identify her and whispered, "I forgive you," when he saw what had become of the woman he once loved. This murder was unlike anything the police had encountered. But it would only be the beginning. Just over a week later, on September the 8th, the killer struck again. This time, the body of Annie Chapman was found in the back garden of 29 Hanbury Street. Her throat had been slit and her abdomen had been opened, but the violence had escalated. Her womb had been removed and taken from the scene. The mutilations were so precise that Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the divisional police surgeon, suggested the killer had some knowledge of anatomy. The coroner, Wynne Baxter, took this speculation further by revealing that a medical school official had once been approached by an American doctor offering money for wombs, hinting at a possible motive of medical profit. Though this theory was later discredited, the idea of a medical man on the prowl added to the growing hysteria. Panic gripped the district. The press, eager for scandal, latched onto rumours of a man known among the prostitutes as Leather Apron, an extortionist who threatened women with violence if they did not pay him. This character was soon identified by some as Jewish, which ignited a wave of anti-Semitic tension in the area. A local man named John Pizer was arrested and later cleared, but not before his image had been smeared across newspapers and shopfronts. The police, overwhelmed and criticised, brought in Inspector Frederick Aberline to lead the investigation. Aberline had worked the East End for years and knew the terrain and its people. He was one of the few detectives to earn public trust during the panic, respected for his diligence and familiarity with the underworld. Then came the night of September 30th, a night that would earn a name of its own in Ripper law. Double event. At 1 a.m, Louis Diemschutz, steward of a socialist club off Berner Street, turned his cart into Dutfield's yard and found the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat had been slit, but her body was otherwise untouched. Police theorized the killer had been interrupted before he could begin his ritual mutilation. If true, he would not be deterred for long. Less than an hour later, in Mitre Square, just inside the City of London boundary, another woman was found, Catherine Eddowes. Her throat was slashed, her abdomen eviscerated, her face horribly mutilated. The killer had taken her uterus and left kidney. A piece of her blood-stained apron was later found discarded in nearby Galston Street, beneath a chilling chalk scrawl on a doorway. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The Metropolitan Police, fearing further unrest, had the message erased before it could be photographed. In the midst of the panic, a letter arrived at the Central News Agency, written in red ink and signed Jack the Ripper. The author taunted the police, claimed credit for the murders, and promised to strike again. The name caught fire. From that moment on, the killer was no longer a phantom. He had a persona, a mythos. Letters poured in by the hundreds, many obvious hoaxes, others chillingly specific. One arrived in mid-October, addressed to George Lusk, president of the Mile End Vigilance Committee. It was signed "From Hell" and enclosed half a human kidney. Was it Edo's? Medical opinion was divided. Police believed it a hoax, yet the sense of dread deepened. A month passed. The streets quieted. Hope cautiously returned to Whitechapel. But the Ripper had one final act to perform. On November the 9th, Mary Jane Kelly was found dead in her rented room at 13 Miller's Court. Unlike the others, she had been killed indoors. What the police found there defied belief. Her body had been practically flayed, the walls and furniture soaked in blood. Her face was unrecognizable, her body dismembered, organs removed and strewn about the bed and room. It was the most savage of all the murders. She was young, possibly in her mid-20s, and enigmatic. Even her real name was uncertain. She had spoken of a life of relative luxury, of Parisian escapades, of lost husbands and tragic turns. Whether these stories were true is impossible to say. Her landlord owed rent, had sent a man to knock on her door. When he got no answer, he reached through a broken window pane and saw the horror within. The door was forced open with a pickaxe. One officer later recalled, "Her eyes stared at me in terror." The crime scene was so gruesome that hardened doctors wept. The terror did not end with Mary Kelly. Over the next 2 years, several other women were murdered in Whitechapel, and though none bore the full signature of the Ripper, many wondered if he had returned. Rose Milett was found strangled in December 1888. Alice Mackenzie, murdered in July 1889, had knife wounds, but not the same precision. An unidentified torso was discovered in Pinchin Street that September. The last entry in the Whitechapel murder file was Frances Coles, found dying in February 1891. A suspect was arrested but later released. After that, the murders ceased. The file was closed. Jack the Ripper had vanished. He was never caught. Hundreds of theories have followed. Some point to doctors, others to butchers, lunatics, or even royals. But in the end, the killer's identity may be the least important mystery. What lingers are the lives of the women he killed: Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary, and the world that allowed them to die. They were not mere victims. They were survivors of a brutal economic system, of a society that criminalized poverty and tolerated desperation. They lived hard lives and met terrible ends. But in the years that followed, they forced a reckoning. Their deaths exposed the hypocrisy of Victorian morality, the failures of the law, and the dangers of forgetting those who live in the margins. Jack the Ripper became a legend. But it is the lives of his victims and the society that failed them that remain the darkest chapter